لا إله إلا الله محمد رسول الله.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيد المرسلين وعلى صحبه أجمعين. So we have covered grief, al-huzn, wal-khawf. The next chapter, or the next bab al-ishfaq. It's a hard word to translate. I'm not happy with the word he used here. Shafaqa generally means to have compassion, or maybe even feel a bit of sense of pity for someone or something. And Imam al-Harawi is using it here kind of in a very distinctive way because he defines it. But as we said, he begins with the ayah, قال الله عز وجل قالوا إنا كنا قبل في أهلنا مشفقين. Surah Al-Tur. So he defines it al-ishfaq, دوام الحذر مقرونا بالترحم. دوام الحذر مقرونا بالترحم. So it is, حذر means to be careful or to be vigilant or to be concerned. مقرونا بالترحم, and also at the same time compassion. So it's sort of a combination of vigilance and compassion at the same time. So it is kind of an extension of khawf to some degree, of fear, but it's the added element of, there's an element of compassion into it. وهو على ثلاث درجات, and as his methodology, he said it's 3 levels. الدرجة الأولى إشفاق على النفس أن تجمح إلى العناد، وإشفاق على العمل أن يصير إلى الضياع، وإشفاق على الخليقة لمعرفة مغادرها أو معاذيرها عفوا. So the first, إشفاق على النفس أن تجمح إلى العناد. So fear of the soul itself, that it will tend or lend itself towards recalcitrance, to be obstinately kind of mired in denying that it has a problem, right? This is what we call al-ind, or al-inad. There is an issue, that you have things to work on, but this kind of consistent denial of it, to the degree that you are willfully and maybe wistfully fighting it off, then this is something very easily for the nafs to fall into. فَإِشْفَاقَ عَلَى النَّفْس, that it keeps doing that. So it has this concern about it and it's vigilant, but it also kind of feels a little bit sorry for it at the same time. That's the first level. And he uses the word jimah or jumuh, tajmah, which is usually the word that's used to describe a stallion or a horse that hasn't been broken in. Right? You have to break the horse in because, I haven't seen it done, I just see the movies, but when they get on top of the horse and he's kicking back and forth and he's not willing to, he doesn't want a rider on him, but it takes riyada, right? It takes some training, a while for the horse to settle down and accept and acquiesce to the idea that this person on top of them is going to kind of dictate where they go and where they don't go. And our nufus are the same way, right? And nafs jumuh, falan. It's something that it's going to fight you every step of the way. And here, at this level, when he's talking about nafs, I believe he's indicating that you are at the level or at the point where you can recognize it's your nafs. In the bidayat, there's no distinction between you and your nafs. You are your nafs. Here, it's saying, subhanAllah, my nafs is really giving me a hard time, right? And you find some of the, the arifun, when they write their books, They say, I tested my nafs with kaza and kaza, and I told her to do this, and then she replied back to me in this way. And you're reading it, and they're talking like as if they're talking about a third person. But when you can get the ability, when you get to a place where you can recognize when the nafs is the one who is pushing you, over the proverbial cliff, then that means you're beginning to get a handle on it, right? When you're not able to, when you're still self-identifying with the nafs, right, and you keep saying, well, I want this, and I want this, and I want to do this, and there's no distinction or there's no acknowledgement, there's a nafs in there that's influencing you, then it's very hard to contend with because there's a self-identification with it. But once you get to the point and you say, nafsi kada wa kada, that's why he puts it in bab al-ishfaq, tarahum, because you realize it's my nafs, right? And so there's a little bit of pity on it because you're almost seeing it as, a distinct entity from who you are, even though it defines partially who you are. So ishfaq ala nafs, right? That it keeps going towards al-inad and going towards this recalcitrance, denial. Wa ala al-amal and yusir ila al-diya', and also that action may end up lost. How does one's action or one's deeds, the amal, it's not action, the deeds, how do your deeds become lost? What is the value of deeds? When do they have value? Sahih. But also, at the end, how do we know, how do we assign value to a deed? If it is accepted by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Tamam? So, it's really worthless until we can feel that Allah is going to accept the deeds. And you were right in saying that what is the key to the acceptance? An intention. Sincerity is the key to having that. So there is going to be this level of khawf, ishfaq, as we said, shwayt tarahum, when you feel like, well, are my deeds going to be accepted or not? Maybe هو, هي إلى الضياع. Maybe it's going to be something that's not going to be accepted, and in turn, we would consider it lost at that point. وإشفاق على الخليقة لمعرفة معاذيرها. So here he translated as that third aspect, and concern for al-khaliqa, for everybody else, in other words, by recognizing their shortcomings. Or recognizing, or I would say, al-ma'adhir is not just shortcomings, it means that you kind of have a compassion that they make mistakes, and that you try to see the excuses that they have in making those mistakes. So that's a type of ishfaq, and that's a high level of ishfaq. That's a high level of compassion, right? Where it's, at the same time, you recognize there's a mu'akhada, there has to be some type of, coming to terms, people who make mistakes, especially when they harm other people. But it also means that you recognize that people are weak. And if you can't even control your own nafs, who are you to make judgment and pass judgment on everybody else's nufus? And this is from amongst akhlaq al-arifin, that they would, when someone would grieve them personally in a way or harm them, they would say, that was his nafs, that was his shaitan, it's, كان في لحظة ضعف كذا. It wasn't, I don't define that person by that particular interaction that I had with them, but in this occasion, يعني نفسه غلبته. His nafs got the better of him. His shaitan or her shaitan got the better of her at this time. And it's not how I define that person. It's not how I see them, right? And if we could all do that, then that would be great. But most people, it's very difficult, especially when in the heat of the moment, and you tell them, fulan ala fikra, I think it's his nafs. But they don't want to hear that. They want to, feel the way that they want to feel. And they don't realize them wanting to feel that they where they want to feel, that's also your nafs that's telling you that. It's not, that's not based upon ilm, that's not based upon sound reasoning or judgment, because for the same reason you're mad at them, you're actually doing the same thing. You're reciprocating in kind. So having this ishfaq ala al-khaliqa, right, understanding that they have shortcomings and they make mistakes, and being a little bit marin, a little bit flexible when those things happen, is min al-akhlaq al-arifin, right? It's from the character traits of the arifun. هذه الدرجة الأولى. الدرجة الثانية إشفاق على الوقت أن يشوبه تفرق وعلى القلب أن يزاحمه عارض وعلى اليقين أن يداخله سبب. So also three aspects to that second level. إشفاق على الوقت أن يشوبه تفرق is having this sort of compassion, concern for your time, that it may be discolored, right, altered by tafarruq. Here's that word tafarruq again that we mentioned earlier, right? And tafarruq means, again, to what is the opposite of jama'. In other words, not in a focused state with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, sort of in a dispersed state. So it's not that you didn't do the deeds, we just prayed Asr. And we all said Allahu Akbar together and we read the 4 rak'ahs. But what was our states when we did it? If I was the Imam, do I remember what I read in the first rak'ah after the Fatiha and what I read in the second rak'ah? Or I don't even remember right now as I'm sitting here. Would that be an indication that maybe I wasn't kind of focused or in a state of jama'ah? And so that time that went by, even though I did fill it with some deeds, we're not talking about deeds at this level anymore. We're talking about the hal and the state where you were at when it was happening. So he's saying here, this second level, ishfaq ala al-waqt and yashubuhu tafarruq. Right? How can I let a time go by that I'm not focused and maintained with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and I'm kind of just out to lunch, as it were, busy with, NHL hockey finals or whatever people are busy. It's over now anyway. So are the NBA finals. So next thing is the World Cup, right? So, but that's different. Anyway. So this tafarruq then is this sense of loss or sense of lack of focus. وعلى القلب أن يزاحمه عارض. يعني subhanAllah, this man is muwaffaq in the words that he uses. على القلب أن يزاحمه عارض. Because the word يزاحم and qalb completely go together. So qalb is heart. Yuzahim means that competition for the focus of the heart. So, because that's the way the heart works, actually. It is very difficult to be focused on two different things. That's why the Quran says that we don't have two hearts in our jawf. Right? It means it's a singular heart that is a focused heart. And so you're fooling yourself thinking that I can be, this whole thing about, multitasking. Maybe the hands and the limbs can multitask, but the heart can't multitask. The heart wants to be singularly focused. And what is the thing that you should be singularly focused upon? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's what it should be singularly focused upon. So al-qalb an yuzahimuhu arid. What is the arid? Yani something came along the way, something unexpected. فَيُشْغِلَكَ, right? And it keeps you busy. And how many are the times, for example, we're having a good, nice last 10 days in Ramadan, and all of a sudden some news comes to us that just completely takes us away from the focus that we had, right? And now we're thinking about the cousin in that other country that's in trouble, or this person who needs an operation. And while we feel compassion for those things, but not that there should be a sense of focus from the heart as a result. It should actually all be part of increasing the focus of the heart. Because all of these hawadith, all of these things, who are they coming from? They're coming from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But we're short-sighted. We see the thing, and then it kind of, the detour takes us off the road, and then we have a hard time coming back to it, right? And sometimes this arid, he leaves the word very vague. Arid could mean anything. Arid means something got in the way, something just happened. It could be a sin, it could be a thought, it could be an event, it could be a person, it could be a memory. Any of those things can be arid. And so يزاحم القلب. It keeps you busy, right? And then you lose focus after you are in a state of jam'a and hudur and kada and so forth. وعلى اليقين أن يداخله سبب. This one's a little bit hard to explain, so I'm going to take a little bit of time with it. Here he translates it as certitude may be undercut by a cause. يداخله سبب. So yaqeen we know. Yaqeen means to have certitude or certainty in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, wal-wa'ad, wal-wa'id, and al-umur al-ghaybiyya, and the things of the unseen realm. All of that we have certainty in. What's sabab? Sabab here is the word that is used to indicate those intermediary things, intermediary functions that lead to specific things, events. So we talk about people who are al-mutasabbib, for example. In other words, how are you living? How are you paying your rent? How are you putting iftar on the table? Andi sabab. What does that mean? Either I have a job, or I have money, or I have investment, or I have something, but I have a sabab, right, that I'm doing that with. And the nature of al-asbab is that they can very easily be distracting from al-musabbib, from the one who is the causer of the causes. The one who is the causer of the intermediary causes is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so sometimes I won't see beyond the intermediate cause, and I'll think, well, that's the musabbib. I won't say that. And on an intellectual level, I realize that's not the case. Amma min haythul hal, right? But from the aspect of your state, you may be acting as if it is, right? When you put all your hopes and your aspirations in the sabab, right, in that thing, such as that if it were removed, you would lose your certainty. Here we say, hold on, stop, right? The sabab is not the indicator of certainty. Are you a sunshine Muslim? Are only when all of your things are as we say, your ducks are in a row and everything is exactly perfect, then you're going to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and feel confident and certain about Him. But when one or two of those ducks are removed and a little difficulty and a few difficult waves come along because you lost the sabab at the particular point, هل اليقين ينقص? Does your certitude decrease? Right? And it may come out in little things. Right? You may delay that particular prayer like you didn't delay it before. Right? You may say, oh, you know what? I should be looking for a job now, so I'm going to delay Asr until يعني شوية أخر يعني. You can delay a little bit, even though you used to be a person who prayed Asr all the time, on time in the beginning, حتى maybe مع الجماعة, right? And then you say to yourself, you know what? I shouldn't be wasting my time in Salat al-Jama'ah, in the masjid. I should be actively looking for the new sabab, and that's taking away from this. La. That's not taking away from this. It's your justification because the level of certainty of yaqeen lost a little bit. Yani hashak, you're not into kufr or you're not even into fisq, but you'll do little things like delay the prayer or make little justifications because you're not quite as certain as you were before because you lost something of the sabab. So here we're talking about it, ishfaq ala hada shay. You're worried about it that you may fall into that. So he's saying, وإشفاق على اليقين أن يداخله سبب. يعني you have the yaqeen, you have the certainty, but you are wary and you are vigilant and you are aware of your nafs now. There's a self-awareness of the nafs, as we said at this level, that some of this thing may happen and it may lead you to a place where, يداخله سبب. Now the yaqeen is هيدور مع السبب. That the yaqeen may join hands with the intermediary cause, and where it goes, the certainty goes. So when the sabab decides to take a break, for whatever reason, then your certainty also decides to take a break. And that shouldn't be our relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Our certainty should be based upon, not on our external circumstances, but upon who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually is, and what we know of Him, and al-hayba, al-ijlal, and all of those things we said before. والدرجة الثالثة, so that was the second level, those three things describing it. The third level, إشفاق يصون سعيه من العجب ويكف صاحبه عن مخاصمة الخلق ويحمل المريد على حفظ الحد. So the first part of that, إشفاق يصون سعيه من العجب. So the pursuit, a type of ishfaq or compassion, caring, which will safeguard his sa'i min al-ujb. Here's another very good word, a sa'i, which is hard to translate. وَلَيْسَ لِلْإِنسَانِ إِلَّا مَا سَعَى, right? So there's nothing for the human being except that which they make sa'i for. فَإِذَا قُضِيَتِ الصَّلَاةُ فَاسْعَوْا إِلَى ذِكْرِ اللَّهِ. Right? So the sa'i means to seek, right? And there's sort of a self-identification with it. أَنَا أَسْعَى. I am seeking, I am doing, right? And sa'i is often used when we talk about a sa'i, للسبب, for example, right? Traditionally, Friday prayer, our Fridays are not like the Sabbath in Judaism, or even the Mass day or the Holy Day in Christianity and Sunday, in that it's not a holy day where it's too holy to work. The Quran clearly says that, Surah Al-Jumu'ah. فَإِذَا قُضِيَتِ الصَّلَاةُ فَاسْعَوْا إِلَى ذِكْرِ اللَّهِ وَابْتَغُوا مِنْ فَضْلِ اللَّهِ. Yani go work. Yani go see your needs. Not it's a holy day, we stay home and we don't have to. La. It's not the Sabbath, right? We don't have a Sabbath. So the sa'i, the seeking of things, right, is always there. And even when we have an ibadah, that's not considered a departure from it, but it complements it, right? And you move along. So he's saying, إشفاق يصون سعيه عن العجب من العجب. What's ujb? Being self-pleased. Being pleased with yourself. So the problem then is, if I am doing this sa'i and I am recognizing it and attributing it to myself, then this can lead to being pleased with myself. And ujb is a very difficult spiritual disease. And it is generally the pathway by which Satan enters into one's heart. Because that's what got him in trouble. He was very pleased with himself. Right? He said, أَنَا خَيْرٌ مِّن. I am better than him. Right? I'm created from fire, he's from dirt. I'm better. هذا اسمه عجب. He's happy with himself, he's pleased with himself. And so when we are actively seeking, and then we have a recognition of that, then there's a danger that we'll be fall into this idea of ujb, of being pleased with ourselves. So he's saying, ishfaq yasunu sa'yahu, right? And ishfaq, a type of compassion and concern that will safeguard this pursuit that we have from being self-pleased. So don't be proud that you're making sa'i, but attribute it to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَيَكُفُّ صَاحِبُهُ عَنْ مُخَاصَمَةِ الْخَلْقِ. And this ishfaq spares one from entering into mukhasama, or dispute or conflict with people. How so? We said earlier that we understand the excuses of the khalq. We understand the lack of ability of many people, because we see it in ourselves, for them to do the right thing and to do things that we think are honorable. So if we see that within ourselves, then why we have the expectation, right, and hold to a higher standard other people for them to do that when we can't even manage that on our own level? So this ishfaq then, yakuffu sahibuhu, prevents them from getting into this type of mukhasama. And one of the things that when people are progressing on their spiritual path is that you can learn to recognize when other people are in a state where their nafs has taken over. You can see it in them. And you know at that particular point, they can't really be talked to rationally. It's not that point. Right? If you're out in the street and you get into some type of altercation, road rage or something, you see it in that person. They're not going to listen to a single thing you say. All they want to do is vent and maybe even cause worse than that. So it's not the particular point in time where you escalate by also acting very nafsani. Right? It's a point in time where you have to act in a way that extinguishes that fire. There's a situation that I was made aware of where someone was driving and was turning into a parking spot. And you know how when you turn the parking spot to the left, you kind of turn this way, and there was a motorcycle or motor scooter that was coming along that and was trying to pass on the left. And as this person was turning in, the motor scooter hit the car, and the guy fell off the motorbike. And he was in a very agitated state, and he was really ready to, do this. But then the person in the car gets out of the car and says, "Oh my God, are you okay? Are you all right? I didn't see you. I hope you're fine. Let's see if you can fix your bike. Are you fine?" What is the other person going to do at that point? Right? Because they were expecting a particular reaction. Right? They're expecting, "Oh, how dare you? How could you? What, are you stupid? You didn't see that I was turning into the spot here? Were you blind or something? You deserve what you got." But no. But instead, recognize, have ishfaq, right? The guy just fell, maybe he's hurt, right? And he's not going to be in a position where he wants to hear how he made a mistake by not seeing your turn signal and trying to pass you on the left when he should have not been doing that, so forth. وهكذا. So that's a small example, but to avoid those situations of conflict, because you have an ishfaq, you have a compassion and a concern, and you see where they're coming from. And he doesn't use the word here, but I would say empathy kind of fits into that as well. I don't know what word in Arabic would use for empathy, but I think ishfaq has an element of it as well in here. So, because it means, if you can have ishfaq ala al-khalq, it means you have to empathize with them. You have to see where they're coming from, right? And it also means there's a level of self-awareness that you have those same problems within yourself, and why would they not exist in others? And then if they exist in others, if I'm so, easy with myself, then I should actually be easier with other people. And the general rule is that you apply upon yourself the more stringent criteria. And then upon other people, you look at them with the eye of mercy, right? Or what they say sometimes, the eye of the haqiqah. Haqiqah means that they're just intermediaries, and whatever they do has been willed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If you were to look at yourself that way, that's very blameworthy, because it's using an excuse for yourself. But when you use it to be compassionate with other people and say, this is the will of Allah, that's the way they are, these are people just, they're actually smoke screens, the real thing is what Allah's doing, so why would I be upset with them? But don't use that with yourself. Because with yourself, you're the one who controls your actions. You're the one who's mukallaf. They have their own relationship with Allah, which is not actually your business. Your business with them is you and them in the relationship you have with them. You're not here to kind of judge how they should be with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's what you do with yourself. But most people do the opposite. They're very easy on themselves and think of a million excuses, but then for everybody else, very, very, rigid and strict and unforgiving, where it should be the opposite. And so, if you have this level of ishfaq, as he's saying, then هذا يكف صاحبه عن المخاصمة, right? عن مخاصمة الخلق. ويحمل المريد على حفظ الحد, right? And the murid, the one who is seeking this spiritual path, then it would also would help them to have this hifz of the had. What's al-had? Preserving or keeping within the limits of the sharia, right? Of the commands and the prohibitions of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? Because they understand that there's not going to be any suluk right? There's not going to be any progression if you are not observing the limits of the commands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's not going to happen. There's no such thing. Those people who say, oh, you have a good heart, and I saw these things, and I had dreams. Imam al-Junayd was asked about, someone who floats in the air, هل هو واصل, or is he in a high spiritual state? Then he said, well, how is he عند الأمر والنهي? How is he in terms of the commands and the prohibitions of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? That's the real criteria, right? He could be a Dajjal and float in the air. But the Dajjal is going to do that at the end of time. That's not a big deal. But how is he in following the commands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? وَأَكْبَرُ الْكَرَامَةِ الْإِسْتِقَامَةِ. And the biggest karama is to be upright, right? Is to be observing the hudud of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So there's not going to be any sort of, you can't consider yourself to be like murid and on the path and so forth if you are not observing salawat al-khams, wa zakah, wa Ramadan, and fasting, and hifz al-hurma, and akhlaq with people. It just, it won't happen. So having this ishfaq, if you want to be on this path, have some care and compassion that it will keep you in line and safeguard you with the limits of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So rather than start on the next one, I think I'll stop here. Inshallah, if there's any questions, we can do that within 10 minutes or so that are left. Inshallah. Tafadhal.
So the way that they're laid down when we say daraja al-ula, daraja al-thani, daraja al-thalith, is it indicating a sequence that one could not possibly have even part of, let's say, the daraja al-thalitha without having the daraja al-ula, or not necessarily?
The way I understand it is, with each level, you're bringing the one before it with you to the next one. So صاحب الدرجة الثانية مر بالدرجة الأولى وعنده صفات الدرجة الأولى ويزيد عليها بالدرجة الثانية. So the one who's at what he calls the first level, when he goes to the second one, then they bring along the things that were on the first level, and then they're increasing it. And the same thing with the abwab, the same thing with the chapters. So when we're talking about ishfaq, and the one before that was al-khawf, then that means he's bringing all of the things of khawf, but now it's more refined, and we call it ishfaq. وهكذا. وبعدين, these are keep in mind they're approximations. You'll find other books who have different orders and different names, but the general idea is the same, even though they may differ mustalahat and certain themes and so forth. You had a question?
I wasn't sure how I was going to word this question. I thought maybe I'll state the point. I had you mentioned shortcomings from Mullah. So I had a serious back injury, really serious, where it caused permanent nerve damage to one of my legs.
Sorry to hear that.
A tear and a disc herniation. So a lot of things I used to enjoy doing, I can't do anymore. And you mentioned shortcomings are coming from Allah. So even getting up to pray Fajr is harder. Getting up to going to sleep is harder. So is this a test from Allah to see if I can still pray on time? Or even my mood is still nice to do brothers and sisters around me? Like, would this be like a test? This is what it sounds like you're saying.
I don't know if I said it like that shortcomings are from Allah, but I meant when we observe other people to recognize that whatever issues that they're having, rather than being the judge of those issues, we should just be people who are observing it from afar and saying that my mu'amala, my dealings are with Allah and not with the people. So I say, well, that person is that way because Allah chose for him to be that way in this particular case. And so that will prevent me from judging them, passing judgment upon them. When we look to ourselves, right, when things come our way, it really depends upon our attitude about it. And I think the best thing that's been said about it was something that's attributed to Imam Abdullah al-Jailani, radiallahu anhu, where he said, when you have sort of unintended events or consequences that come our way, it depends upon our attitude about what they are. So if you feel that it's a punishment from Allah, that's what you feel in your heart, then it is a punishment from Allah. Because it's enough that you have that feeling, right, that Allah would punish you in this way, that becomes a punishment. However, if you feel that it's a test from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then it's going to be something that is going to help you along your path. It's, at the very least, it will be takfir dhunub. It will be something that will expiate any sort of shortcomings or sins that you had in the past. And then you see it as a positive thing. But then the highest way to see it is that it is from the commands of Allah in the dunya, and that I should be content with it. I have a rida with it. And then at that point, it will raise you in degrees. So you will no longer, like say if it's a physical element. And I don't know your particular situation, but let's just say in general, people tend to kind of evaluate themselves and self-identify with their level of physical prowess, especially if someone was an athlete before, and they blow out a knee or they're no longer able to compete. It's a big shock to the system because they see themselves, I'm LeBron James, the greatest basketball player in the world, or I'm, Cristiano Ronaldo, the greatest, he's not, but he thinks he is, the greatest soccer player in the world, and so forth. And then what if they had some type of injury where they're no longer LeBron James, the greatest basketball player in the world? Then they say to themselves, well, then what am I if I'm not that? And so the thing is, before even, when you thought you were the greatest basketball player in the world, that's not who you are. So sometimes Allah is going to send things our way to remind us, and sometimes those lessons will be harder than others, right? It reminds that's not who you are actually. Who you are is something completely different. At the end of the day, you are Abdullah. You are the servant of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And whatever other things that you think you have, this is the basic, inherent, intrinsic thing of what you really are. And that door is always open to you. You're going to be Abdullah forever. And it's not dependent upon your basketball prowess or your physical prowess or your intellectual prowess or how much wealth you have or how much you don't have. You're still going to be Abdullah. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants the good for us, and He wants us to be Ibad al-Rahman. He wants us to be Ibad Allah. He wants us to be acknowledging and recognizing that we are the servants of Allah. And He wants to bring us to paradise by the path of ease and facilitation, not the path of chains and imtihan and of trials and tests. So one of the ways to ensure to keep the blessings that we have is to constantly be grateful for them. And gratitude for blessings is not by saying, oh, alhamdulillah, I have good health, but it's using your health in the manner it's supposed to be used for. If you have physical abilities, then use your physical abilities in the manner that Allah has commanded you to use them. Use your eyes for the things you're supposed to use them for. Your ears, your tongue, right? Your tongue is not there to spread rumor, innuendo, and gossip and malign people and libel people and slander people. It's to spread truth. It's just to make islah between people. لا خير في نجوم إلا من أمر بصدقة أو إصلاح أو معروف بين الناس. 3 things, that's it. When you have like a private meeting with somebody, there's only 3 good things that should come out of it. Either you're commanding some good or you're reconciling between people, right? What was the third one? Sadaqa, or inviting to a type of charity. But other than that, if something else comes out of it, if it's not ma'ruf, it's not something good, it's not reconciliation between people, then more likely than not, it's going to be something that's going to be detrimental to you. So, use your blessings in the manner they're used to be used. Not only will you preserve them, inshallah, but they will increase. Bismillah. And sometimes what we think to be at the time as really the worst thing that could have happened, you may reflect later on, years or months or maybe even days, weeks, how there was a silver lining to it and there was something in it that actually led you to a road you had not pursued, except if you had that particular incident happen to you. Wallahu a'lam. But at least we try to maintain that attitude, when these things happen, inshallah. Nobody from the sister's side? Very quiet. Didn't hear anything. Guess everything makes sense. Fadal.
I'm not sure if this was mentioned before I came late, but so we're talking about nafs, وجموح النفس وعلامة السيطرة على النفس.
تمام.
So what's the opposing side of nafs? Is it the mind or is it al-qalb?
تمام.
I think you mentioned this before.
No, I didn't actually specifically, but Imam al-Ghazali says that the four aspects of humanity or the human condition are four things. Al-aql, wal-nafs, wal-qalb, wal-ruh. And they each have particular functions within us. So the qalb is that which can interpret and see the haqa'iq, see the realities and feel things. Like the Quran says, أَلَهُمْ قُلُوبٌ يَفْقَهُونَ بِهَا. Al-aql is that which keeps you in check. Because al-aql comes from the word al-iqal, which is the thing that you tie your camel with. Right? Aqilha wa tawakkal. So the thing that you, so it keeps you from making mistakes. What we call intellect in English. In nafs is the life force, but it's also the one that doesn't have any bounds. So it's the one that wants to eat and wants to sleep and it wants to just satisfy itself. That's why we refer to, all of those, the shahawat, the nafs al-shahwaniyah. When we say nafs, we're talking about that nafs. هذا موضوع تاني أو مصطلح تاني. When we say is a utlaqat, if we just say nafs without something after it, we mean a nafs al-amara bis-su'. If we say a nafs al-mutma'inna, then we're talking about a nafs التي ارتقت إلى مستوى الروح. So now it's a ruh, because the ruh is the thing that is the dealing مع مخاطبة الإله. This is the thing that is taking the haqa'iq from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because Allah addressed us when we were arwah, right? We were arwah before we were anything else. And the day that He said to the arwah, أَلَسْتُ بِرَبِّكُمْ قَالُوا بَلَى. Right? Am I not your Lord? We all said bala. What were we at that time? Arwah. So ruh is the pristine form of who we are. And so what we're trying to do actually is get the ruh to inform who we are, what we're doing, rather than in nafs. So when we talk about nafs, we mean a nafs al-amara bis-su'. And so that's why tarkiz, the focus on a nafs, because it's the obstacle. And we want to get open to the valley of the ruh, inshallah. Yes?
Question from online. Somebody is asking if, how would you compare between two people, somebody who has more knowledge or performs more acts of ibadat, if they fall short from, whatever they were doing, that would be a loss compared to somebody who, doesn't have much knowledge and doesn't perform much extra worship, but then they start to perform a little bit more. Are they, then at the same state, or what's their situation?
Who is the first one again?
Sorry, the first one is somebody who is already in a state where they have knowledge and they perform extra acts of worship, but then they begin to fall short of their usual practice, versus somebody who doesn't have much knowledge or perform extra acts of worship.
Well, the ibrah is not just practice. It's sometimes people have varying levels of practice, but that doesn't necessarily mean that their internal state is less or not. It's not but what you see by the outward. Sayyida Nafisa, what did she say about Imam al-Shafi'i? كان يحسن الوضوء وكان يسبق الوضوء. He used to do his wudu very well. So people will be like, what does that mean? Does that mean she's doesn't think that much of him? No, she's saying she thinks quite a bit of him, right? Because if you can do those things right, then that means all those other things will be right. من أشرقت بدايته أشرقت نهايته. Right? Whoever's beginning is enlightened, then their end will be enlightened. And sometimes they say that the person at their nihaya, their ibadah looks like the person at their bidayah. In other words, it doesn't seem to be so much extra and more than everybody else. The Prophet ﷺ clearly remarked about Abu Bakr as-Siddiq. He said that ما فضل أبو بكر عليكم بكثير صلاة ولا صيام. He is not preferred over you because he's doing so much more extra salawat, ritual prayers, or fasting than the rest of you. ولكن بشيء وقر في صدره. But by something that stirs in his heart. So everyone has to do the fard, obviously. And everyone should be striving to do the sunnah as much as they want. But that is not necessarily an indicator that this person is in a higher state or lower state. In fact, it's not for us to compare to do that. When we look at ourselves, right, it's better to have a state of hudur, a state of contemplation in less ibadah than have a lot of ibadah and you don't have that. Right? That's why the Prophet ﷺ, he said the man who wanted to finish the Quran like every day, and he told them don't finish it in less than 3 days. So he preferred the lesser ibadah here than the more. Why? Because he said in less than 3 days, la yuqal. In other words, you'll not be getting the benefit out of it that you should be getting out of it. Right? When Sayyidina Abdullah ibn Amr ibn al-As, and he went to the Prophet and he heard about, the Prophet heard about him wanting to fast every day. And so he told him, if you want to fast, then just fast, 3 days out of the month. He says, I can do more than this. He said, fast Mondays and Thursdays too. I can do af'al afdal min dhalik. He said, better, come on, I can do better than this. He said, then fast every other day, the fast of Dawood, alayhi salam. He said, I can do better than this. He said, laysa afdal min dhalik. The Prophet said back, there's nothing better than that. In other words, fasting every other day is superior to fasting every day. But you might say, well, that's increased ibadah. But ibadah is not numbers, right? Ibadah is effect. Because the one who fasts every day, then it will be like just a regular thing for them. Whereas the one who's fasting every other day, then they have to switch between fasting and not fasting. This will have more of a spiritual effect on the soul than the one who is fasting every day. وهكذا. So, I don't know if that answered the question. Yes?
You know how he talks about contentment and being content, whatever Allah has given us, but I just want to talk about the injustice that happens around us. Do we just accept it and walk away and say, hey, it comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or do we need to do something about it? Or what are the sense of?
What do you think? Here we're talking about hearts. We're not talking about what we do outside of that. No one should be, if they have the ability to correct an injustice, most of the ulama consider it to be sinful if you don't do something about it. And obviously what I mean by having the ability means you're in a position to actually affect something, right? I don't mean that you can do something about it, but then, your village will get carpet bombed as a result. That's not the ability to do something about it, right? We're talking about you're in a position where there will not be a worse consequence that comes about as a result of you taking some action. So yes, no, we don't stand by and watch injustice. And sometimes it means doing something about it. Sometimes it means raising awareness about it. And sometimes, as the hadith indicates, it means that recognizing in your heart as an injustice and detesting it is also part of iman. Right? This is min shu'ab al-iman. This is from the branches of faith. You wouldn't be a believer if you didn't think that, our Palestinian brothers or our Syrian brothers or our Iraqi brothers or even brothers in Haiti and in Latin America and other places and people who are illegally detained, if we didn't feel that these things were wrong and that you wanted to do something about it, we'd have to say something is wrong with you. But at the same time, we shouldn't get to a level of despair that will have us lose our level of certainty, as we said earlier, right? So this should in no way affect our level of certainty, our yaqeen in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has already showed us and promised us that this world, the way it is now from our perspective, is always going to be flawed in that way. It's not a world of perfection. It's not a world where all of the commands of Allah are obeyed. Because if Allah had willed it, He can make everybody obey His commands. Can He not? He did not will that. So He wanted something else. That means there's a reason behind it. So nothing is random, nothing is out of sorts, but it's all the way it's supposed to be, but also we have to be the way we're supposed to be. So when we're faced with injustice, we take it on if we can to the best of our abilities. And at the same time, our hearts remain contented that this still is all under the saytara, is all under the will and the power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we should never lose sight of that. I hope that makes sense. طيب, I think we'll stop here. جزاكم الله خير. We will be resuming, I think, sometime before Taraweeh.
Yes.
inshallah. So نسأل الله سبحانه وتعالى أن يوفقنا جميعا لطاعة الرسول صلى الله عليه وسلم، أن يبارك لنا فيما بقي من ليالي رمضان، وأن يجعلنا من عتقاء شهر رمضان، وأن يبارك لنا في أوقاتنا وأولادنا، ويفتح لنا فتوح العارفين به، وأن يفرج عن إخواننا المسلمين في مشارق الأرض ومغاربها. الحمد لله رب العالمين. الفاتحة.